Good evening, and a very warm welcome from Military Literature Festival, Lucknow. A special welcome to our esteemed panelists, that is Colonel Rakesh Sidhu, Brigadier S.P. Sharma, Colonel Atul Kochar, Colonel Ranbir Singh Baduria, Colonel Manoj Chanan, and Major General Arjun Muthanna, whose fifth book on IPKF for the honor of India was just released today. My friend Ratnesh Chaturvedi of Rajarif, he died during IPKF operation. So my course has said that today's session be dedicated to him, along with the 1,280 or so soldiers who sacrificed their life for the nation. All the panelists were young officers 35 years back when they entered Sri Lanka for the so-called peacekeeping, which resulted in over 1,200 Indian soldiers sacrificing their lives. These were 32 deadly months from 1987 till 1990. They say ours is not to question why, but just to do and die. While the parliament debated why, the soldiers went on the duty. As part of our season 2 theme, 75 years of independence and armed forces, after covering the north and the east and the center and Ukraine, we now move south to Sri Lanka, IPKF or Op Pavan experiences. This was a different kind of a war, one never expected to be seen by our government or our armed forces. But wars are like that. Peace is what matters, and all effort toward peace are welcome. Sri Lanka had seen ethnic tensions for centuries. They only increased with incoming of the Britishers, and after the country got independence in 1948. Around mid 70s, things started boiling. Before we listen to the voices from the ground and jungles, let's first pay homage to the soldiers who gave their life for the country. It is the endeavor of our literature festival to promote military fraternity talents. So today we bring to you a piece by Brigadier M.S. Sandhu of Special Forces from Canada. He runs a noble enterprise called World Peace Through Harmonica. Over to him for his 2 minutes video. With that homage, we move on to our today's duty. Today's moderator is Colonel Rakesh Sidhu, He was a mechanized infantry officer who spent a long time in Sri Lanka. He is a prolific writer, a thinker, and an adventurer. Just about 2 weeks back, his team of Ipkf veterans, all above 60, completed the 6,500-kilometer run across the northeast of India. His books, Elephant in High Himalayas and Success from Being Mad, have been widely acclaimed. So, over to him uh, to discuss the honor of India as to how these that time young five officers uh, had their experiences. You can shoot your questions in the chat box. We have about 50 minutes. We can extend it. So over to Colonel Sidhu.
Thank you, General Hemant, for giving us the opportunity to put across the point of view from the grassroots level of the young officers who were there in Operation Pavan, Sri Lanka. And a very good evening to all the viewers of this session. The IPKF, that is the Indian Peacekeeping Force, Operation Pavan, and Sri Lanka, they are interlinked in the annals of India and its military. If I were to put my finger on one word that would best define the national commitment, it would unhesitatingly be surprise. The signing of the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord was a surprise not only to the nation, but more importantly, even to the military, which had all along been preparing itself for a conventional military operation and was surprised to launch it on the very next day as a peacekeeping operation. Again, after 2 months, the switchover from peacekeeping to peace enforcement also came as a surprise. And subsequently, after 2 years, when the official call came in by the Sri Lankan president for the Indian peacekeeping force to leave Sri Lanka, it also came as a surprise to our hierarchy and the security establishment. This proclivity for being surprised impacted the thousands of unsuspecting troops and their families who overnight found themselves being diverted to Sri Lanka without support weapons and ammunition. I look at today's 1 hour session as a mere appetizer to whet the appetite of our viewers, as it would take minimum a week's symposium to cover the full gamut of Operation Pavan aspects. In today's session, we shall look at the issues involved through the prism of two books. One is How the Wind Blew, and the second is Valiant Deeds, Undying Memories. To highlight the relevant issues, we have a team of 5 veterans. Major General Arjun Mathanna, who is from 12, 10, and 18 Gadwal Rifles. Lieutenant Colonel Atul Kochar, who is from 1 Jack Line. Colonel Ranbir Baduria, who is from 10 Para Commando, and whose write-up is also featured in one of these books. Lieutenant Colonel Manoj Chanan, 65 Armored Regiment, who is also a strategic analyst, and Brigadier S.P. Sharma, who commanded his unit 18 Maratha Light with Elan in these operations. Having said this, I would first take on the book, which is How the Wind Blew, Operation Pavan. Arjun, my compliments to you for writing this book, as well as a series of 4 other books, the latest of which is For the Honor of India. Now, to start off, I'll first like to quote from the preface, which has been endorsed or written by Arjun, which puts the things in the correct perspective of what was there in the geopolitical environment of India when this operation commenced. So I'll start off. Rajiv Gandhi, as a fresh-faced 40-year-old prime minister, a new forward-thinking chief of army staff, General K. Sundarji, exercised brass tacks in the west, the Mizo Peace Accord in the northeast, Operation Falcon in response to China's PLA's forward movement in Tawang area, and then exercised checkerboard in the east. Operation Meghdoot on Siachen Glacier had just begun, and Kashmir was peaceful. These were the heydays for India and the Indian military. Thereafter, when I go further down into this preface, I see there is a bit of an angst which comes out. While the major players at the national and strategic level goofed up right royally, Arjun writes, the commanding officers, company commanders, junior officers, and troops bore the brunt. They were confused about being pitched to fight. They were fighting a foreign armed organization whose support base was in their own backyard, Tamil Nadu. The enemy they had shot and incapacitated found succor and medical treatment in Tamil Nadu to return and fight them again. Hand grenades manufactured in Tamil Nadu were being used against them. And the most angst, the most disheartening than to be completely ignored by your country after you return from the battle in which you lost more than 1,200 comrades and even a greater number maimed and disfigured for life. The irony is that while India does not even have a memorial to mark the sacrifices, Sri Lanka has one in Colombo. So, with this as the backdrop, Arjun, I'll request you to give a brief about your activities in the Operation Pawan.
Thank you, Colonel Sidhu. I was actually on staff as a captain, as a grade 3 staff in Jammu. I had been on leave come furlough because my dad wasn't keeping too well. And I had just about returned from leave when my BM told me that I'd been posted, asked to move forthwith to 18 Garhwal Rifles, a battalion that wasn't mine actually, had just recently been raised. And the peculiarity of 18 Garhwal was that it was the new class composition battalions that had been raised post Blue Star. So we had a company of Marathas, a company of Garhwalis, a company of Jats, and of Dogras. So anyway, I think for the only time in my service, I got this forthwith move. So I was required to move within 24 hours, and which I did. And fortunately, I had to take my wife along, drop her off in Chennai, where her brother picked her up. And then I proceeded to Jaffna. Well, I landed there in the month of November because my posting order had been issued around very late in October, rather early November. So when I landed up there, the initial advance of the battalion into Jaffna from the east, that is from from Kaitadi area into east into Jaffna, had been completed about a couple of weeks before that. And I think I was amongst one or two of the Tamil-speaking officers in the unit, though my Tamil wasn't very good, but I could brush it up. So I was there as a company commander. Of course, I was fortunate to have an odd stint out of the island because of various the routine commitments that we had in terms of leave and courses. But I spent nearly a little over 2 years in Sri Lanka, and I left just before the unit de-inducted from Jaffna. So we operated mainly in Jaffna Peninsula, in the southern parts of the peninsula. When I say southern, means just south of the main town. Most of it in Jaffna town, fighting what I would say is a urban counterinsurgency, where the LTT hit and run, and then we did our best to protect the local populace and, of course, carry out vigorous operations against the LTT. After the initial period,
Arjun, if I were to intervene, how do you rate the general LTT rank and file as a fighter?
I would say that they had no boundaries. They were not drilled into, into what we guys got drilled into, conventional operations. There was a greater freedom and imagination. I found at least, I think video libraries had over 1,000 video cassettes, in those days, video cassettes of all these Vietnamese, US war movies in Vietnam, B grade, C grade, whatever you call it. And those guys, one was that the motivation level was so high. They felt that they were in a fight to death against the Sri Lankan, or as they felt, the Sinhalese army. So for them, it was a fight to death. So I'll just take a minute more. The initial cream of the LTT, the thinkers and planners, other than Prabhakaran, who was very charismatic, the next level of leaders were essentially college graduates or college students. And in Sri Lanka, being a college student meant something much more than what it was in India. Those guys were absolutely intelligent. And those guys adapted that training. I can speak a little bit more about their foreign exposure, which I got to learn from Colonel Madhavan, who I see is also listening to this webcast. So I would put it all in one way: innovative, motivated, and ready to die. And I think that is what gave us a tough fight in that initial period.
Carrying forward from your preface, you also talk about the human cost of war. So I will quote here: for many who lost their comrades, these are painful memories. Some of them have refused to even talk about their experiences. We pray that they find peace within themselves. So, what is it that was the human cost of war, even for the Ipkf soldiers on the ground?
One was to oneself would have been if you were injured. So those of us who were fortunate to come out without being injured, it was the next worst thing was seeing your comrades getting injured, possibly in some cases dying in front of you, where you could not get them to medical aid, or then just hearing that somebody had died. For most of the Ipkf, I would say entire Ipkf, the automatic fire was something that most of us were not used to, though it was just an AK-47, but it gave a very different impression of, of what you were facing. I remember we once landed at Madras airport on one of our routine trips back home, coming on a spot of leave. And there was an explosion somewhere around the airfield, and the entire set of transients who were there all fell down flat on the ground, taking position. And now when I come to think of it, I would say there was some degree of PTSD, though we've all coped with it. But I think there was an element of that. So those who lost people there would have felt bad. A lot more would have been more frustrated and angry. I see that on some WhatsApp groups. There's a lot of frustration and anger. But in my own case, this has been a catharsis. I mean, I started with book one, my preface. If you read my last preface, it's possibly not as, there's not so much angst any longer, because for me, it's been a catharsis reading these accounts of all the people. And one final clarification, I haven't written the books. I've only compiled and to some extent edited accounts of people who have been through their experiences.
Thank you, Arjun, for your candor and frankness. And to add to what he is saying, I mean, I'll just narrate an incident. When the first I came back from Sri Lanka on leave, this was in the month of December, after the intense operations of October and November were over. And my young daughter, she was just 3 years old, and she just clung to me. And when I was leaving after spending 2 weeks, she was just able to utter 3 words: Papa, don't go. And for the entire quarter to 3 years that I was there, she had intense skin eruptions. And when I came back finally, those eruptions had vanished. So when I discussed this case with the doctors, they said it's a psychosomatic ailment. So the families also went through a trauma, which is generally not talked of. And even for the men that we have today from the commandos, Colonel Ranbir Singh Bhadoria, with this, I come to the second book, The Valiant Deeds, Undying Memories, and I just pick up one aspect which Colonel Bhadoria has written in his article. After a quick change, I moved to the unit via the military hospital to kiss goodbye to my wife. A few minutes of pleasantries exchanged. Not much can be said in these moments of life when uncertainty stares at you in the face and only God gives you hope. Few words are spoken, and those not spoken are felt. She kissed me good luck with tearful eyes. I held back my tears, smiled, putting up a brave front, asking her to look after her son, who was then just 2 years old, and drove down to my assault team, waiting to board the IL-76 aircraft. So, Colonel Badhuria, would you like to reminisce about this event? What went through your mind, and what went through the mind of not only this thing, your family, but the family of the men whom you led into the battle in Sri Lanka?
Yes, Colonel Sidhu. It so happened that for me, it was a total change. A day before, we were in Delhi waiting to collect our passports to go to Russia for a free fall course. When we suddenly realized from the MO that our unit was being mobilized, and to add, to tell you, matter of fact, the officers present in the MO, they said, Moscow, you can go later. This is just a 14-day war. I will narrate an incident of my battalion where there was a buddy pair of the one fellow was a Sikh, a Jat Sikh, the other was a Malayali. The Jat Sikh boy dies in battle. His ashes are taken home by this Malayali boy. He is going on leave. The CO tells him, take this to his village, give it to them, come back. He gives it. He goes back on leave. Once he's going back, he's still very tormented about the family. He goes back to Punjab. He joins the unit, takes leave, goes back to Punjab before joining the unit to meet the family again, how the state is. And when he goes there, he finds that all the in-laws are now hounding her for money. He comes back, he doesn't speak about it to anybody, he joins the unit. He's totally a changed man. The team commander asks him, we all notice the change in him. Finally, he opens up to the Panditji, who tells him, I'm totally surprised how, for whom are we fighting? If I die, even in my case, people will only be looking for money. So this is tormenting him a lot. There were many other cases where people have not come out, but this is one case which we tried to settle him, and he was still in touch for a long time with that Jawan's family, and he made it a point that she got all her dues back. So I feel as officers, this should be a part of our training to educate our men the after effects of war, which we don't tell them. What we tell them is, you have to fight well. You have to fight well for the name, izzat of the battalion, for the izzat of the unit, for the izzat of the nation. We don't tell them what are the after effects and how they should. Their families also should be psychologically trained to fight. Should in case they are martyred in battle.
Thank you, Colonel Badhuria. You've so very well brought out. There were near 1,200 KIAs killed in actions whose parents, wives, children waited in vain for their return. And we seldom talk about them. It's high time that we started changing it. We were all young combat leaders at that point of time, and it was our turn to lead our men in battle then. I think now it is our dharma to ensure that they get their due. Thank you very much. With this, I get on to the book Valiant Deeds, Undying Memories, written by Colonel Atul Kochar. Atul, before I get on to the book as such, may I request you to share your record of your stay and operations in Sri Lanka?
Thank you, Colonel Sidhu. Our unit first deploy was located in Embroy. That was in 1987. We had just come back from op checkerboard and also from training of Royal Bhutan Army in the East, Yangpula. And I was on leave. Somewhere in November, mid-November, we got a warning order to be prepared to move for Sri Lanka. That time I was a second lieutenant, hardly completed 1 year of service. The unit was mobilized on 25th December 1987. We left from Madras by air. That Group Captain Baboor was our pilot. So finally, inducted, reached Madras. We were there. There was some internal situation had gone bad. Finally, around 6th of January 1988, we reached Trincomalee port. And we were deployed in Trincomalee town. We had a very compact deployment. We were there for entire almost 1988. We held the election successfully and we handed over to 7 Siklai, then Major Narwane, former Chief of Army Staff, his unit. And after about a year, we moved to Batticaloa for about another 7 to 8 months. Batticaloa, we had classic jungle warfare and guerrilla warfare. We had 2 major operations, Op Jack Trap and Op Fox Hunt. We had some major successes. So that was for about 8 years, 8 months.
May I interject in between? I think you have got some statistics about the immensity of the operations which were conducted by the 3 services. Would you like to share them with the audience?
Yes, sir. I guess you are referring to what makes this operation unique. So the enormity of this operation, I just like to go through. Firstly, we had severe constraints. We all know it was peacekeeping force and turned to peace enforcement overnight, which was a big challenge. It entailed something else. General mobilization had also not been ordered. The companies were going into battle in Jaffna with 70%, 60% of their strength. The 8 Mahar, their company of Major Ganapati had 60 people when they were fought in Anakodai somewhere around mid of October, 20th October. So that was one. Secondly, there were no maps. We had just tourist maps. And this was, of course, later we learned it was a prolonged stay, 32 months. These are key highlights. Now, firstly, let me come to the Air Force, the uniqueness. They executed 70,000 sorties, that is in a span of 32 months, which is the longest in for such a short period, so far unrivaled. Now they had to modify and do the special innovation to get the T-72s in. Group Captain Baboor was closely involved in it. B-25 Hepter gunship, which had just come few years back from Soviet Union, was tested there in the jungles mostly because to reduce casualties. And Mi-8s were also extensively used. This is as far as Air Force is concerned. As far as Indian Navy is concerned, a transportation of more than 1 lakh tons of stores, which is a record. 4.2 lakhs troops were taken to and fro. That included relief and RECU, etc. This does not include vehicles which were carried, that is 7,800. Now, naval effort also included mobilizing merchant vessels, that is non-navy vessels. 5,006 days of patrol were performed and 8,300 hours of flying by naval helicopters. Just for your information, in 57 Div, that was the only CI Div, specialist Div, they had naval helicopters to support. Commander Rufus had earned his fame there. He is very well known there. Now, and the Indian Marcos, they did a remarkable job. They did 64 operations. The Marine Special Force did a wonderful job. They got 1 MBC and they got about 3 more Veer Chakras also. I'll come to the awards later. Now let's come to the Indian Army. This is one of the largest deployment under a national mandate with its own flag. The Ipkf flag, as Colonel Sidhu would know, is separate, and all 3-4 disparate divisions were put under one flag under a national mandate. This by itself was unique, and strength was about a corps, little under a lakhs, which were deployed there. Aviation Corps. Now these helicopters which came from all over, they are coming from Gwalior. They had to be ferried. they had to fly on their own propulsion. They were not carried by air or IL or something like that. That was a very major effort involving few days with halts. So in that execution itself, they did up to 2,600 kilometers from Gwalior to Jaffna via the various helipad which were there en route. The aviation corps did 18,500 sorties of flying in 11,700 hours. All these records are unrivaled, and there is no comparison as far as any operation is concerned. Chetak was specially modified for accommodating 2 medium machine guns and was given a special fire support role. As far as the RT is concerned, RT was used in CI Ops first by itself, extensively in the jungles, and in initial Anakoda battle, they are giving almost DF SOS to the company of Major Ganapati, which fought in the Battle of Anakodai. Both the motors and 831 light battery were giving support to them.
Thank you,
Infantry, we
Atul.
all know about it, so I'll not cover much about it. But suffice to say, we were outgunned, and as far as intelligence is concerned, that part I think somebody is covering.
Thank you, Atul. Just to bolster what Atul is mentioning, as far as the flying hours are concerned, the flying hours which were undertaken by the Indian Air Force, by the Cheetahs, or the hours which were run by the Indian naval ships, or even by the tracks meterage which was exploited by the mechanized forces. To put the things in perspective, I'll just tell you that for the operational infantry combat vehicles and the armored fighting vehicles, the authorized track meterage for the entire year is 300 kilometers, in some cases 250 kilometers, and for the training, it is 800 kilometers in a year. Just in one night, when the Sri Lankan president wanted the Ipkf to get out and sent an ultimatum to the GOC Ipkf at Trincomalee, and the defensive positions were altered. This defensive posture was altered by the Ipkf on orders of the High Command. My company moved out from Vavonia in an overnight road march and did 250 kilometers in one night, stretching over 16 hours. So suffice it to say that the entire year's operational meterage had been completed by these ICVs in just one night, and we operated there for almost 2.5 years. When the unit went back after the operations were concerned, the first thing which the EME battalion of the 31 Armored Division did was, they said that this unit is unfit for war. They have completed their entire track meterage, which is authorized for the life of an infantry combat vehicle. Same was the case with the ships, same was the case with the aircrafts, and so on and so forth. Now, there are a number of questions which have been raised by Colonel Atul, this thing in his preface, and they also put the things in correct perspective. So I will just read them out. However, the Indian peacekeeping force intervention is considered a fall-through case. Is this epitaph justified? What were the political aims and imperatives? Did the Indian Army have unbridled freedom to operate? Were the forces even reasonably equipped or prepared before being launched into battle? Or was the IPKF just soldiers for the working day, as Shakespeare would say? What kind of intelligence was available prior to the launch of this force into Sri Lanka? What was the higher level to address such a contingency in an out-of-country operation, and was it adequate? India's intervention also raised questions on issues of legacy and the treatment meted out to this peacekeeping force, which was unwelcome on return to Tamil Nadu. No government official from state machinery came forth to receive them at the port of return. Even General V.K. Singh, who happens to be an Indian peacekeeping force veteran and a former chief of the army staff, in his book, Courage and Conviction, writes, there are insufficient post-critical analysis of the Sri Lanka episode, even within the Indian armed forces. So if I were to go into why it is necessary to even look at Indian peacekeeping force Operation Pavan operations, it has been best reduced to words in the foreword by General Milan Naidu. He says, this operation had certain unique dimensions which need to be analyzed as a precious repository for future wars. The first out-of-country overseas operation by India in a world where a rapid intervention force may well be a strong requirement of an aspiring Bharat, as unfolding events in Afghanistan have revealed, there is a necessity to review this operation. The testing ground for the fledgling aviation corps, where they flew 18,500 sorties in 11,700 hours. This was the first operation which saw demonstrated an extensive inter-arms and service cooperation after the 1971 war. For the information of the viewers, the Indian Peacekeeping Force headquarters, which was the Ipkf and which was at Chennai, was a tri-service organization, a first formal tri-service organization of the Indian Army. The newly formed Marcos were employed extensively in securing ports and destroying LTT assets near the sea. They had participated, as is already highlighted by Atul, in 64 operations. The Indian Air Force flew 70,000 sorties, a record for a single operation in a span of 3 years. I mean, when we look at the entire span and the gamut of the Indian Peacekeeping Force operations, the other operations which are well undertaken and which are commemorated hold no candle or light to what happened in Sri Lanka. The tactics and operational aspects adopted by the Indian Army here would shape the junior leaders of those times, though the subsequent decades of militancy faced in Punjab and J&K till date. The integrated employment of para-commandos under a single commander was enunciated here itself. Having spoken about this, and which we will come to a little later, I will address Colonel Bhaduria. Colonel Bhaduria, you were in your article, you write that you were part of the special heliborne operations which were conducted on 11th, 12th of October in Jaffna University. So you sort of, after a brief introduction, the warning order was received on 10th October 87 and the operational order on 11th October 87, which was interestingly a Sunday. The operational order tasked us, please listen to this carefully, to secure a landing zone for 13 Sikh and then raid the LTT political headquarters or any other target in the vicinity. I see that there is some dichotomy in this tasking. When they say that leeway was given to the force commander on the ground, raid the LTT political headquarters or any other target in the vicinity. Were you or your team commander involved in the planning and preparation of this operation before the issue of the warning order and the executive order?
Well, we were only issued the warning order 24 hours before. Maybe my TYC and the team commander were involved, were told, rather they were told or they were not briefed. They were told that there's a heliborne operation where we knew we had to go for a heliborne operation, but where we had to land, we were not sure. This order only came 24 hours before, that you will be landing somewhere near the for the capture of their leaders. Where we will be landing, the next day the aerial recce took place, not by us, but by the commanders. We had seen it earlier. In fact, once those were the few days just before the lull period, before the war started, before the cyanide had been taken by these LTT boys, 18 of them, who were there at the base ops in Palali. We visited the town, bought a few things while coming back. Twice he was driving the vehicle, so I told him, let's go to the university and see. After all, these are the chaps who are actually fighting the war. We went to the university. We went exactly to that helipad. We halted the vehicles. He said, no, we should not. I said, let's go inside and see, meet them and talk to them. After all, the war is not, they can't shoot us as such. We are not carrying any arms. Arms were there in the vehicles, but we are not carrying it on ourselves. He said, no, it's not looking very safe here. Let's go back. Major Shunan said, let's go back, get out of this place. Time was around about 5:30 in the evening. I said, sir, move on, let's move. But Major Nair said, no, let's go back. So we turned back. We had seen the helipad, but lot of other commanders like CO 13 Sikhalai, the staff of the headquarters, the pilots who were to fly us, they all, and incidentally, they all took the same circuit there. When they went for the recce, they took the same circuit. Instead of one chopper can go from right to left to right, this chopper was flying on the same circuit, right to left. With the result, it had given way that this was the place something big was happening. And as it is, they had intercepted our communication network. How they had done that, not in my purview to tell.
Bhaduria, just to corroborate what you are mentioning, I also quote what Air Commodore Vishwanath Prakash, who was flying one of those aircrafts, has to state that it was late afternoon of 11th October, an aerial recce of a possible landing zone was conducted. A football ground was pointed out to me. The ground was in the middle of a built-up area next to a road, barely 13 to 14 kilometers from Parali University, and were the Jaffna University grounds. The helicopters subsequently made 6 to 7 such trips, always turning around at the same spot, a possible giveaway of the location of the LZ.
Yes.
So when we say what you are corroborating about how we went about carrying out the recce, you talk about the intelligence of the operation being available with the LTTE. You talk about the commandos not being initially involved in the planning of this operation. Was there any aim, or not, I'll call it aim, principle of war, which was not violated while planning this operation?
Well, I think the basic principle of which was the surprise was given away. Biggest element of warfare is surprise, which had already been given away, number one. Number two, the briefing of the subsequent troops. We were prepared. We had prepared ourselves initially to fight the Sri Lankan army. So troops were already in a battle fighting mode, whereas the troops who were following up, like the Sikhalai, they were coming all the way from Gwalior, had no clue what they were there. They landed the same morning, and the same night they were there in the helicopter, in an aircraft in which they did not know how to load themselves, how to put the loads. And when you are loading, what are the aspects to be taken into account? That is where they, I think, fell short of when they carried the ammunition without the mortars. And that was the biggest folly, I think, which was
what mentioned here. The error they committed was that the 81 mm motor platoon had ammunition, but no weapons / motor to fire that ammunition.
Absolutely.
So when we look at that, we also look at the dichotomy in the operational order, where they talk about the political headquarters or any other suitable target, which implies there was some lack as far as the information was concerned. So was it right to go ahead and plan such a daring do operation?
RS, the problem is for us as junior leaders, it was not the reason to question where are you going. Our question was to execute what the task given to us. You come back to the same.
And I can assure you that the task under the circumstances was done well. And it goes to the credit of the troops and the commanders on the ground that we came back with the least minimum of casualties under the given circumstances. I also read in this book about the time when this thing was splashed with blood from one of the casualties. So can you talk about that?
Uh, this was on the morning of 12th when we had left the landing zone and we had entered the built-up area. And it is here that Major Nair, my team commander, who could speak fluent Tamil and understand too, he and Vice Major Shunan, they were ahead. I was bringing up the rear. They went inside. The doctor was in between. Doctor also, Ajit Venur was also could speak Tamil. So we had two Tamil speaking. And as it is, we also had, because we have a mixed composition, we had few Tamil speaking boys. We took them there, entered a house where they found an old man and a lady were there. Their one room was locked. When they asked them to open the room, a young boy and a girl came out. So we asked them, who are they? He said, this is my son and this is my daughter. This is my daughter-in-law. Why have we locked them? He said, there is an LTT camp close by. They come and take away these boys from here. So while they were saying, why have we locked them? He says, so that they don't come and take them away. I said, where is the camp? They said. He said, it's close by. Can you show us? He said, yes, just a few hundred yards from here. It was morning round about 10 to 6. The first light is broken up and we could see clearly. As we started going ahead, hardly we had moved about 50 yards. If you see the Sri Lankan Cocoville map, there is a Vembadi lane, which is about 15 to 20 feet wide. And Cocoville, that Vembadi lane area is a very posh area in the Cocoville. So as we entered that area, there was a fire. The fire started. It was from the trees we could not see. We had a few casualties. One of my MT Havaldar, one of my MT NCOs who were ahead of me, got a shot on the back. I realized the shot was coming from behind, turned back, or asked my RL to fire. I knew some civilians or some militants who were there had been eliminated because we could hear the cries of men and women too. Women also were crying. We moved ahead. The moment we went ahead, again the fire came from a house. The fire came. So we entered that house. We ran toward the house. I was ahead. There was another boy, and my twice was Major Shunan was behind me. Moment we went there, there was a chap who rushed towards us. Seeing him rush, Major Shunan fired a shot at him. This shot hit him right on his chest. I think it got his pulmonary vein, and the blood spurted out. I have not seen blood coming out of a human body like it comes out of a tap. It just came out like a fountain, and it spilled over me. I said, okay, we moved ahead. And after that, we moved ahead, and we kept going ahead, moving ahead, till such time my party, which was consisting of 20 people, I had only 9 left with me. They had all dispersed. What happens when the fire comes? Everybody takes cover. One who is hit, he's the only one. But rest of them, you can hear the sound coming. You will never see a man. Where from who's firing? Because he is firing from cover.
Colonel Baduria, I want to highlight certain incisive highlights about the comparative weapon systems and the LTT capabilities, because some of us in our discussions give them a superhuman capability. So I'll just read out from your an excerpt, so to say. The LTT, the enemy's fighting capabilities, his weapon systems and tactics were not known to us, in bracket, at that point of time, except for the reliable and versatile 84mm rocket launcher, Carl Gustav, a couple of passive night sights and Bergen rucksacks. The rest of the weapons and equipment were of vintage and put us at a serious tactical disadvantage compared to LTTE. Now you also say that the fire which was coming at the helipad side, at the site, from the LTT was in military parlance plunging, which is not ideal when citing automatic for us, as neither we nor the Siklai platoon took a single casualty from enemy fire, which continued throughout the hour of darkness at the helipad site.
That's
So
right.
it talks a lot about the capabilities of the LTTE, that they were not superhuman. They were the ones who could make mistakes and did make mistakes. And at times they were good, and at times they were as bad as could be any other fighter on the ground. So with this, I come to the to Manoj Chanan, the tank man, and his writer in this book. He was there with the 65 Armored Regiment, and he writes, the regiment fought the initial intensive battle in Jaffna, meshed with various formations, units, and subunits. At times, just single tanks were used for certain tasks, a modification born of necessity. These squadrons seldom fought as cohesive subunit during the initial months while being attached with formations. As such, their achievements were rarely recorded. And he goes on to quote Colonel Anil Kaul, who got the VRC and was there as the officiating squadron commander. One lone tank sent on 11th October 1987 had been deployed to lead the advance of 72 Infantry Brigade against all the norms of teaching and practice. The additional ammunition called Unit Reserve had also not reached Jaffna. In the event, I found myself with two tanks, one less a commander, about to enter the field of battle. At the crossing, I also teamed up with the third tank, where I was informed that the gunner had been wounded and evacuated. It may be worthwhile, this is what Commander Kaul said, this Major Kaul says, it may be worthwhile pointing out that I had requested maps of the area and an additional radio set for communication with division brigade headquarters. I was asked to share a map with CO-10 Para Commando, which was photostat copy of a tourist map.
Yes.
The radio set provided was an ANPRC-25 truck ground version, which was useless on a moving tank. Manoj Chanan, would you like to talk about this aspect and your experience in 65 Armored?
So I would like to just bring out a few factual things, which would put everything in the right perspective. Because when you look at the statement by Colonel Kaul, it seems a little out of place in the manner it has been stated and recorded. If you're aware, on the 29th, 30th July, when the peacekeeping forces landed up in Sri Lanka, 65 Armored Regiment 1 Squadron was also at Chennai, and they were told to stand down because it was now a peacekeeping operation and they didn't anticipate any offensive operations. But when the peacekeeping turned into peace enforcement, and overnight there was a requirement of flying in the tanks into Jaffna, everything was sort of ill-planned, because when the tanks landed, the crews that sort of I spoke to later informed us that the GOC of 54 Infantry Division and some of the senior officers there would point the road towards Jaffna and say, go and catch Prabhakaran and get him back. Now, we all are aware that tanks normally operate as a troop, that is minimum of 3 tanks together under a troop leader. But here, without any leadership, the tank crews were just pushed out, and at times were just mobile platforms leading the infantry columns and were being told to eliminate targets as indicated from time to time. It is at a much later stage, I think, when Colonel Bhinder, that time Major Bhinder, arrived into Jaffna, and there was a semblance of taking or regaining command and control of the mechanized forces. And as has been recorded in the book, there was a task force Kohli and a task force Bhinder that was created. And then thereafter, there was a more organized employment of the heavy equipment, that is tanks.
Manoj, with your second hat as an analyst, you've also analyzed the intelligence aspects of the operation. Unfortunately, we do not have Lieutenant Colonel B.R. Nair, the co-author of the book Valiant Deeds, Undying Memories with us, who is also a hardcore int man and rather was with the intelligence unit which was deployed there. He says that the int officials were persona non grata as far as the Div headquarters was concerned. So what was the role assigned to the intelligence operations, and were they effective, and were their int inputs employed effectively?
Sir, during Pawan, I think when the initial lot of intelligence officers landed up with 54 Infantry Division, as is the norm, everybody looks at the corps officers as, with a sense of untrustworthiness, and they would treat them and keep them at bay, thinking that probably they're here to spy on them and not give us any worthwhile information. But in my interactions with Colonel Nair, I got to understand that they were able to go around into Jaffna, start getting some information, and they were trying to sort of pass on this information to the David quarters, which was, of course, not being taken very seriously. But the entire intelligence operations there were marred by various factors, for the fact that there was nothing forthcoming from our various intelligence agencies, whether it was R&AW or the IB, or the state police intelligence units within Tamil Nadu, which could sort of give us any worthwhile intelligence. On the contrary, whatever was being done was probably being fed to the LTT through various channels. So overall, I think it was a very, very badly planned operation. And I think that is one of the reasons that the government of India does not want to spill the beans on how ill-planned it was, and they did not know what was happening. And maybe people at that time, I think, had a bigger sway from the R&AW than probably our own senior fraternity at that point.
Thank you, Manoj. In fact, in one of the formation headquarters, while moving around in the course of my duties, I came across one of my ex-commanding officers. So when I tried to salute him, he literally ran away. He was in civis and he says, "Hush, I am David." So we do not talk about these things openly, but there was certain lot of undercurrents which were taking place, which we who were there on the ground were aware of, and because of certain constraints, feel restrained to talk about these things. But Brigadier Sharma, you were part of 57 Mountain Division, and as has already been highlighted, the only formation which was trained for counterinsurgency operations. In fact, one of the most successful ambush operations were conducted by 13 guards of 24 Mountain Brigade in Kalmanai sector, where when they got inputs about a LTT party of 6 likely to move at night on a road which had a lagoon on both the sides, they went into ambush shoulder deep in the lagoon waters for 6 hours before they sprung the ambush and killed all 6 LTT personnel. So I also had the opportunity of meeting then Colonel Sharma. He was commanding 18 Maratha Lai, and I had just moved, as I talked about this thing, after an overnight move of 250 odd kilometers. And that was also the time when joint recce's were being carried out to undertake operations against the Sri Lankan armed forces and the armor, in case the things went out of hand. And I had a good interaction with the unit. And I found that then Colonel Sharma and his unit, they went about it in a very professional manner. But not only about that, I would also request Colonel Sharma to share the complexities and the responsibilities which he had to share, not only about the troops, but about the families. What was it that was there at the back of the mind of a commanding officer of infantry battalion in Sri Lanka?
First thing is, now am I okay? Audible now?
Yes, yes.
First thing is that we took over from one Jackal, that is Atul's unit. And to that extent, we were not very, exposed to the complexities of operations as probably other units found in the beginning of the operations. Now, our unit was deployed over a distance of about 65 kilometers in pockets of, company platoon blobs. Movement being restricted, particularly during day, it was very difficult to, communicate effectively with the troops. All the communication now on the communication part of it, we had civil telephones, probably belonging to the Sri Lankan exchanges, and we found that whenever we wanted to communicate something to the units or subunits or sub-subunits, those things went fut. There was just no communication with subunits. So then we had to fall back to our own ANPRC 25, which we all know as to how confidently we can speak on that. So there were chances of that also being, compromised. So what I found was that first thing was that, it was very difficult to communicate with the troops on a personal level, as you would like to, meet them, communicate, motivate them in your personal way. Then I had to circumvent and I had to find out a way. Then what I used to do was that every day I used to visit a unit or subunit or a sub-subunit. The subunits which were a little isolated, I used to visit them, stay with them for the night, have their sort of details, and then come back to the battalion headquarters. This way, probably I managed the sort of, the motivation aspect of it. The second thing was that probably, these fellows, LTT and CVs, were having complete control of our were looking at us from various OPs, LPs. And whenever we moved out, we found that, whatever, at times we had very solid information about the militants, but whenever we moved out, we found that the militants were not found. So probably our movement was being, compromised, I should say. Now we had to find that way out. Now what we did was that we started functioning in CVs. I thought that this was the best way to get to these people before they get us. So we commandeered 1 or 2 odd vehicles, one Sri Lankan vehicle also, because Sri Lankan company, as you know, was just about to cross the road from us. So I commandeered their vehicle, fully knowing that probably this may also get compromised, but all the same, I didn't have any other resources. So 1 or 2 odd civil vehicles, and you see, from those Muslim fellows whom we thought were, quite okay with us. So commandeered those vehicles, and then we started, getting out in a group of 2 to 3 people from different directions, converging at a particular place, getting into that vehicle in CVs, and then going around, because in our case also it was almost urban insurgency operations. And to our surprise, we found that I think 3rd or 4th day of our operations, we got one of their district commanders with 2 chaps.
Wonderful.
Now, this went on for another 10-15 days. Then we started going in uniforms. Thereafter, again, after 10-15 days, we turned over to CVs. On the 3rd day, we again got a district commander, the newly appointed district commander. So within a matter of about 15 days, we got 2 district commanders of theirs. So this was one sort of a thing that I thought I should highlight. Other things have been highlighted. The maps were absolutely wrong. We couldn't find anything.
Sir, as a commanding officer, how did you handle the conveying of information about the KIA, one of the most sensitive matters which a commanding officer has to deal with?
You see, the problem was that all the families had moved out to their respective places, because we had moved from a peace station. We were fully knowing that operations had been going on for about a year and a half by then. So fully knowing that as to what we were going into, unlike the previous speakers who had gone into absolutely, in the dark. So all the families had moved out to their respective places. Some of them were there in Gurdaspur, from where we had moved out. And so to that extent, we had an officer who was a low medical category. We had left him.
Oh, thank you for the one additional point. It is for Colonel Atul. On the Siachen War Memorial, there is inscribed words, quoted in snow, silent to remain. When the bugle calls, they shall rise and march again. But for the Indian peacekeeping force veterans who were killed in action, there is no bugle call. It's a silent commemoration whenever we have done it. You are pursuing the legacy for the IPKF veterans and for the Operation Pavan overall. Can you share in next 2 minutes, because the time is running out, about the legacy issues of the IPKF that are being pursued with the government and the military hierarchy? You are muted. Colonel Atul is muted.
Thank you, Colonel Sidhu. There's something I would put it crudely called a minimum wage. Now we forget about what all we have discussed. A soldier who dies in battlefield has to be honored. The Americans did it quite late after their 20-year involvement in Vietnam, but they did it. So that learning curve is over. There is a time to discuss about battle, how it was fought, but there is always a time to honor your brave. Now, this is not being done in case of Pavan. We find that our VIPs and military leaders go and lay wreath in Colombo, but they are shy of doing it here on a collective day and on an official day, which should be earmarked to do it. Jet par with 71 and other wars, that is the Kargil War. These are the only two ones which are commemorated at the National War Memorial. So this is a very minor thing, but it is very sad and unfortunate that number of chiefs who have been in our Pavan have not taken this up. And it is high time we honored the soldier, because this silent bugle and all, it makes no sense. Because honoring collectively gives strength to the people, to the bereaved people who are there, and to the NOK. Only yesterday, the director, Zilla Sainik Welfare Board of Punjab, Brigadier Sidhu, shared with me that one nephew of one of the Shaheeds of 13, not Shaheed, that is the brave who had been killed, 13 Sikh Lai. And he was asking why nobody talks about this operation. Just a day back, I read another article about honoring our guys who participated in the First and Second World War. So this anomaly has to stop. How the government or how our army is deciding on protocol to honor a particular operation. But I'm happy to say that we have interacted with the army authorities, including AG Branch, and they have assured us that the matter is being looked into positively. And we hope the issue will be resolved in some time to come. And as far as we are concerned, we have commemorated it privately for the second time on 29 July 2022.
Thank you, Atul. Before handing over to General HK, I will just mention one aspect. The IPKF, when de-inducting from the island, carried everything along with it. Some to be dumped into the sea and some brought back for repairs and overhaul. But we left back some of the graves, the remains of our KIAs in the graves on the island, which are still there. Thank you, participants, for talking about such an issue. And as I have already pointed out earlier, this is just whetting the appetite. It is just touching upon the various issues, but not going into the details of them. And I once again thank General HK and his team of Lucknow Military Literature Festival for giving us a voice. As you called it, the voice from the jungles. Thank you.
I had requested Manoj Chanan to briefly give some summing up comments. So in about 2-3 minutes, Manoj, you can say and sum up the session or any thoughts which you have had, because you have articulated earlier also. Manoj Chanan.
Thank you, sir. I think through this forum, we've been able to interact and put a point of view across to all the participants, and maybe many more through the YouTube channel, which was live during the interactions. The complete discussion that we had this evening was very well structured in the manner that we had Brigadier Sandhu give his homage to the IPKF killed in action at Colombo, and we have had the fortunate experiences of Colonel R.S. Bhaduria explaining how the special forces operations were carried out and what were the shortcomings therein, what were the apprehensions even when on ground he expressed to go into the Jaffna University, but there were certain limitations, I suppose, at that point of time. Overall, I think this operation is unique in a way that post 71, it was a tri-service operation launched across into another country. We have many lessons to learn from it, and I think each speaker has been able to bring it out. And there are, of course, many questions that have been put into the chat box, which could be addressed a little later. The innovativeness of command and control has been brought out by Brigadier Sharma very well, and of course, the way he has been able to interact with the troops to ensure that the morale of the troops remained high, and I'm sure that was across the board, across all units and formations. In the end, I think one would only like to state that this operation was a blessing in disguise for our army, because while we were there on the island, the insurgencies of Northeast, Punjab, and Srinagar, J&K had erupted, and our battle-hardened, on-the-job trained infantry units which came back were able to substantially bring back a certain amount of peace in these disturbed areas in a very short period of time. So every thing, I think, has a very positive aspect, and I think this was the most positive for us and our country. With that, I hand you back, sir.
Thank you so much, Manoj. I'll just read out some questions and comments. One is, actually this question was asked by me only. How do we compare the equipment of both sides? Who was supplying and who was supplying weapons to LTTE? Who funded it? And some answers have been given in the chat box only. Then there is a question from CJ. IPKF was a failure of a senior leadership or only failure of the government? So this is one part. Then from RP Singh, IPKF was a peacekeeping mission by Indian government, not United Nations, on knee-jerk, high-headed decision acceptance to eliminate LTTE within 48 hours was converted into Op Pavan on tourist maps into the foreign soil. Why Indian Army suffered a very heavy casualty was it not a strategic tactical fault which was never accounted for? My question is, was it not a knee-jerk op? Who's to be blamed, political leadership or military leadership? Did our army leader from Colonel Chauhan fail to read the situation? How was the coordination between army and Air Force? And then a question, one of the panelists, briefly tell us about one or two intense ambush operations. How lethal was it? So then General Muthanna has answered the question on the equipment. With that, I will request, we can take up 2 questions. Some have been answered. We will not go into the questions which are about the political or military leadership and the blame game and all that. One is just briefly about 2 minutes. How was one of the deadliest ambushes, so that people who are listening now know there are claymore mine, this, that happening, and how quickly it over? How do you respond? Anyone. And secondly, somebody can tell us what was the actual difference of the weapons and how they were getting.
I can give out one ambush which took place. We moved out of Trincomalee. The movement we moved out of Trincomalee towards the jungles. It took us some time to adjust. That is when one patrol of our section patrol was ambushed. Now, LTT's modus operandi was very simple. I mean, not that something great. They would observe the movement for quite some time, because whenever you go to an ambush site, you will find toothbrushes, there lungis and towels, these kind of things. It's obvious that they would stay unobserved. And that they used Claymore and AK-47s to ambush our boys. We lost 2 boys in that ambush in Ipkf. That is about 8-10 kilometers out. They were very thorough and methodical. And we were actually set with this, typical schedule of patrolling. They would know that we are getting together for khana at so and so time. So these routine they had come to know. So this was one big issue which we had to tackle. And that was one. Then another was in my vehicle was ambushed. They put a claymore atop a tree. So they detonated it with the 2 batteries and wire. One boy was killed in this thing. And the diesel tank burst, the vehicle stopped. And that's it. It's just 2 minutes. That's what they would disengage. So this is in Badikalwa sector. So this account will come out in my subsequent book, which I plan. That is going to be a little more scholarly, the next book. So
Thank
these
you.
are 2 examples I can.
The aim of this question was for a larger audience to understand how lethal the war is. Claymore miles in the trees in a jungle, and you're moving, and things opening up, minefields and things like that. Karan Sidhu, you could tell us about equipment very briefly. Karan Sidhu.
Equipment, sir.
Karan Sidhu will answer that. May I request Karan Sidhu?
Book.
Okay, as far as the weapons were concerned, the AK-47 was a lighter weapon. It had a folding butt also. It had more rounds in the chamber, that is 30 or 32 rounds against the 20 in the Ipkf, this thing 7.62 mm SLR, which was bulkier and could not fire short bursts of 3 rounds, which the AK-47 was there. So with all this thing, what happened that it was easier to carry out operations with the AK-47 rifle, especially in the close quarter battles, which took place in the jungles and in the built-up areas also. And then when we look at the hand grenades, our M36 hand grenades, they were bulky, and 80% of the times they refused to fire. I mean, you pulled the pin, you went through the trouble of throwing it, and it used to be a dud. Whereas the hand grenades which were available to them were the latest and very, very effective. Same was the case with the equipment also. The web equipment which was authorized to the Indian peacekeeping force or the Indian military at that point of time, the moment you carried, you loaded it with 2 hand grenades, and you had your 5 rounds, magazines put into the pouches, there was no way a person could do dash down, crawl, fire, and observe these type of drills, because the pouches, they came in the way, and similarly the small pack at the back, it came in the way when you wanted to roll over and carry out all these activities. They also had their .50 machine guns, with which they used effectively to deny area for the flying the Hepters. as already been talked about by Colonel Bhaduria in his write-up, that the efforts to supply ammunition by air failed. Same was the case with the 45GR when they were surrounded by the LTT and various other units also. So all said and done, it was a big issue, and it goes to the credit of the troops and the units that they overcame these shortfalls of equipment to carry out the operations against the LTTE. In fact, once interacting with the para commandos, it was highlighted that even the equipment which was available, the weapons which were available to them were certainly less effective than the weapons which were available to the LTTE, especially their Sea Tigers and their Black Tigers. Nevertheless, the most feared were the Black Patkas, which the para commandos regularly wore on their head, and of course the Akbars, and of course, as the tank man Chanan would say, the armored fighting vehicles.
Okay.
And here also, I will like to add that who supplied weapons to the LTTE. This is one of the most interesting facet of this Ipkf operation, that the LTTE were supplied weapons not only through the arms and the drugs and the smuggling trade which they were carrying out extensively from Southeast Asia to West Asia, but also by all the main components who were there present, that is the Sri Lankan army also, the RAW also, they were giving them weapons.
Very interesting. What we'll do is we will make a slight deviation. General Muthanna wants to say something, Colonel Chanan wants to say something, and Colonel Rajesh wants to say something. So I will first thank everybody, and give my some points, and then we will assume the session is closed, and still many people would remain, so we will talk about for another 10-15 minutes, but we'll talk formally. So as we gather after this long session and such interesting narration by all of you, there are three sides which have come out. One is the military side, and one is the peace side, which is actually the requirement of the civilian populations whom we protect, whether in India or in Sri Lanka. And third is the geopolitical side and the inter-country relations and security aspects. I would say the man matters, the commanding officer matters, and equipment matters. So these are the three things which are highlighted because for 32 months, we had the resolve to stay on, despite hundreds of odds and challenges. So this is where the man counts at every level of military hierarchy. It is the call of the duty, and we can carry on endlessly while we have been at it. One thing is about equipment coming, who is supplying equipment to others. So we have equipment coming to Naxal areas, equipment came to Northeast, equipment came to J&K, equipment came to Punjab. It's one of the, once the equipment comes, then the situations turn around. There is a case of blame games versus failure or downside. So we will not get into it, but if a force has fought for 3 years and come out, there have been aberrations. I think great job done. They need to be recognized. There is no uncertainty. Nobody needs time. Nobody needs a file to really say, yes, we are going to do it. So Colonel Kochar and all of you have taken up this legacy issue. Is so very important. Now IPKF is also coming a bit into limelight only because about 8 books have come out this year and number of articles have come out. If you go on to the other side, Sri Lankan side, there is so much of writing and so much of poetry because in between these battles, a lot of civilians were caught and they also have a voice and they say a few things. Those poetries are very touching. Uh, we did a session on the 60s. So we found 1962 war, 1965 war, Mizo insurgency, Nagaland, Naxal. The whole, it was a decade of war and violence. Now you come about a decade, 2 decades later, in 80s, you have IPKF, you have Punjab, you have insurgency in Northeast, you have insurgency starting in J&K. So all this is not just happening. There are many designs behind all that, as one can assume. So our grateful thanks from the Military Literature Festival to Colonel Sidhu and his team for staying with us for this long time and sharing very interesting, serious narrations. And our salute to all of you because you fought on the ground. It is not easy to fight in those jungles with total uncertainties. And that is where army counts. We have the ability to operate with uncertainties because next time some other uncertainties will come. So that is bottom line. We will continue, but before that, uh, after bad time, there is a good time. And if there was Mehka Karenge, if you are not there, still we will be there. And so that was the homage which we played in the beginning. Now we play the second homage on a different kind of a song, where things have improved in across the borders, across the seas. Pankaj, would you play the second video? So that is the aspiration of people who live on this earth. They want to live under the Neele Gagan ke Tale, and it is our job. It is job of many to ensure that such situations are there for everybody to enjoy the Neele Gagan. As far as army is concerned, although this is not a lesson take home session, uh, but to meet people's aspirations, because things can change anytime, we have to be ready to fight. We have to be ready to understand how to fight. We have to be ready to prepare ourselves for a fight. We have to be ready with our logistics. We have to have great intelligence, and we have to train and have better equipment. Then one can ensure the security, which is our prime job. So with that, uh, we thank Mandeep Sandhu for taking us around Sri Lanka with this beautiful song as the peace is prevailing. And I will hand you over to Colonel Sidhu, who may ask initially General Muthana, he wanted to say something Manoj wanted to say, and something what Rajesh wanted to say. We'll have to unmute Rajesh. Pankaj, will you unmute Rajesh? Say about 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, General HK. I will first offer the dais to Manoj to have his say.
So
Manoj?
I just basically briefly wanted to bring out the fact that the LTT was not fighting a very defensive battle. There were not more than 8 to 10 cadres who were engaging the Ipkf at any point of time. It would be a quick, short encounter in which they would engage and sort of change their locations very frequently, thereby giving an impression that the number of cadres engaging the troops was much larger. The second major aspect I wanted to bring out was that in their preparation time from the 30th of July 87 till the operations commenced in 10th October 87, they had laid out extensive minefields by using IEDs, and they very successfully used these IEDs against the IPKF, whether it was the tanks or the ICVs or normal V vehicles. So in a sense, as Atul also brought out in the brief ambush experience that he had, they would use these IEDs and encounters to disrupt, and they would also do sniping at night out of effective range, just to harass you so that you couldn't sleep. So that was just part of the normal tactics, and they were definitely not something very, very effective as combatants. They also valued their lives, but yes, they were willing to die for a cause which they fought. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Manoj. Arjun, you would like to say something?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One is about this aspect that General HK had asked about the LTT ambushes. The innovativeness was fantastic. There was one instance in a brigade, in a battalion in our brigade, where there was an RPG attack on one of their posts. When I say post, it was a sentry post. Fortunately, nothing happened because the rocket hit a lamp post which was in front of the sentry post, and that the people inside were safe. So it was normal routine. Patrols went out to secure the area from where the firing had come, something that obviously the LTT had monitored. And then they found a cycle. The cycle had a bundle of LTT leaflets on the carrier at the rear, the carrier at the back. And one inquisitive Jawan, tried to grab it. Before the officer could shout, "Don't touch it," this guy pulled it, and the cycle had, explosives filled into the frame, the V frame that holds up the cycle basically, and that exploded, and the Jawan lost his leg. I mean, innovative ways. They knew our patrols would go out, they carried out the attack, and they left this booby-trapped cycle there. There were many instances of bodies being booby-trapped, so we also innovated our drills, where any time you had to recover any body, you would you pull it out to make sure that before you turned it over, you always turned it over. You had some drills to turn it over so that you won't be surprised. A second ambush, CRPF, which was securing the town commandant's office in Jaffna, they had a routine. They had a series of outward ring machan-like posts, posts at a height to look over the area. So at night, they would vacate those posts and they would occupy posts about 20, 30 feet behind that at lower positions, because at night it possibly didn't need to be elevated. And then they had a drill of reoccupying these posts, these machans during the day. And they would go out at first light and then they would search the area. Very, very well organized drill. And then they would occupy the post. But one thing that had possibly the LTT had observed was they never checked the roofs of the machans. And they also had the same timing every time. And there was a time device, the sentry went into his post, and about 15 minutes after he occupied the post, there was an explosion from the roof of the machan, whereby that post sentry lost his life. Right. My understanding was units that adapted at battalion commander and lower, in all the accounts that I have gathered and published, as you can see, 4 of them are already on Amazon. There are 11 accounts by commanding officers. I don't know how I missed Brigadier Sharma since I had known him earlier. All the COs who had to speak, they all referred to the lack of preparation, they referred to the lack of equipment, they referred to all the inadequacies. But the point that they all did was that how do they cope and how they came out of it pretty well. As Colonel Sharma himself says, Brigadier Sharma says they didn't have any casualties, I think one of the few units. But the units that adapted, I see a comment here by Colonel Ved, units that adapted, junior commanders who adapted, changed their routines, made sure they never caught repeating things where people who really came out, unscathed. I won't say unscathed, but they really came out performing pretty well. One last point, this issue about how families were informed. I was just about married, so I know how it was when I was sending my wife home and trying to hand over my the set file that my head clerk from the brigade headquarters had given me, which had my nomination, will and all that. I mean, she was young, 22, 23 years old. Didn't want to think of the worst. I had to finally hand over the file to my brother-in-law and tell him, God forbid something happens, don't worry, the army will look after you guys. As luck would have it, a couple of months later, there was one Mutana was killed in Sri Lanka. I think Colonel RP is in the group here from 5 Marathas, and news traveled home saying that Major Mutana has been killed. And my wife was literally devastated. And of course, I had told her that before news reaches you through the public, through the media, you'll definitely get it firsthand from somebody from the army. So don't worry about news like that. But there was a bit of turmoil in my family because everyone was trying to find out which Mutana. As luck would have it, it was another Mutana from 5 Rajput. My unit, 18 Gadwal, had moved from Gwalior. 13 Sikala was also from Gwalior. They were all in the same military cantonment quarters, what we call the Stadium View Colony or SV Colony. And my commanding officer's wife, Mrs. Mankotia, was telling me, she said it was horrible. If anybody vehicle drove up there and 2 officers in uniform stepped out of that, as a staff car came into the colony, all families would be in a state of tension because they didn't know which door it was going to. And the sad part was when the vehicle passed that particular block of houses, all those ladies would sort of heave a sigh of relief. And then their immediate next worry was, where else was this vehicle stopping? Thank you.
Thank you for that very profound words. I'll just narrate. In 71 also, there were 2 Amarjeets, and the message went, Amarjeet has died, has been killed. And both the ladies were together. Now and they did not know which Amarjeet. So I will leave it at that. And my own mother's younger brother, in 1962, a letter reached his house, his wife, that your husband is no more. But he was in signals, so within 1 day of that, he was able to ring up. He says, no, I'm here. So that was an official message. We are now clocking 120 minutes, 2 minutes each, not more, to Atul.
Sure.
But
Sir, I just want to make, I'll take only 1 minute. Out of the 1173 casualties list which we have from the National War Memorial, casualties affected 130 units, that is killed only. 130 units have been impacted, including major and minor units. Now, this is a very remarkable figure because of the frequent turnover. We have not come to the wounded as yet. So the number of units which are impacted would be well about more than 200. This just figure is quite alarming.
Colonel RP, about 2 minutes.
Yeah, there are 2-3 incidents since I myself was involved in the operation. Whatever they have said, I think LTT was young to fight with us. They had all the various measures to fight using weapons like AK-46. And it was the first time we heard the sound of AK-46. That time, 47. They used RPG in front of my eyes, shooting up to the Raptors of Naval Raptor running away from the site. They used those RPGs on the ammunition vehicles, direction finder signals. And the fellow was along with me getting shot, and we're still continuing how to break their ambush. They used to follow us until the time when the lesser strength than them, till then used to quietly follow, monitor us or move. And when our strength used to reduce from battalion to company, then they used to encircle us. And of course, they knew the terrain, they knew everything. We didn't have any maps. So we are fortunate enough to come out from the Sri Lanka with lesser casualty, whatever it is. About claymore mines, they used to hide in lagoons, 200, 300 meters, having the codex, using call bells, buttons. And if you are lucky, then some information is with you. And if you're lucky, if you can spot the dry leaves, you know where the claymore mine is, then you are safe. And about the casualties, or about this thing, myself and Ranjit Muthana both were coming. And we're in Lucknow before induction. We went to Hazratganj. He bought a card for his wife's birthday, Geeta Muthana, 19 November, in month of October. And then he wrote a letter beforehand. He gave it to us. Give it to Geeta if I go off. And he had an intuition, everything. And of course, he has allowed her, his parents, how to go about after his death. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel RP, and our salute to Geeta. She lost her husband. It's a very tragic thing. 27,000 or so telegrams have arrived in the dead of the night or in the daytime. It's a very, very difficult situation. But we take it forward that if we are well prepared and we are well organized and we are flexible enough to operate here, there, that's what our job is. And great salute to the soldiers who were there for 32 months and came out having done their job wonderfully.